Welcome to another edition of Throwing Out Some Heavy Light. My name is Aljamal Binding. I'm the chair of the board of Movements Omaha for Racial Equity. It's been an organization that's been around for over 10 years, and we deal with anti-racism and race issues and issues where people can talk about some of those contentious issues that we don't get a chance to talk about in the public square at times in these parochial communities and areas that we live. On this show today, we've invited Andrew Sullivan. This is his second appearance within a month or so. We have to bring him back again, and he is a social critic. He comes from a different perspective. I've known him for over 10 years, probably more than that, because we met at a table talk event and some things at Creighton years ago. And so Andrew's the kind of guy who has some different ultra-conservative sometimes positions and so on. But one of the things that we've always agreed to be able to disagree in a respectful way. And I also like the fact that he can push the buttons in our community, particularly people who are trying to hide from some of these controversial, some of these logical, topical issues that we deal with. Yeah. Again, one of the things I'll say about Andrew is that he's not afraid to banter and talk about some of these issues. He reads a number of books. He keeps himself informed on some of these issues. And so we wanted to start the year out by asking him to come and talk about a number of issues related to the woke community and some of the racial issues and some of his unique ideas. He has a blog, or he has a column that he writes frequently, and so he has a website where he shares that, and so he's also agreed to maybe throw some stuff at us to have some stuff to share on our website related to race and equity issues in Nebraska. So Andrew, let me first start off by saying, can you provide a brief introduction of yourself before we get into the questions? And then the format today will be people will, after 30 minutes to our conversation, we'll open it up and let people talk directly to Andrew with a chat, or directly talk to him, raise a question or comment or whatever. And again, we can disagree, and that's what this is all about. So Andrew, can you tell a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I'm a lifelong resident of Omaha, born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska. I've been engaged in political issues and social issues since I was in my teenage years. Was in the Democratic Party, am known for being a libertarian during the 90s on there, was a state chair and had ran in a campaign. And then by the year in the 21st century, I moved into Republican Party. But then when doing so, I've also come a little bit more sharper on the economic issues and political issues and social issues on there, and trying to making commentary on them. With the changes that we're seeing in the news media, that's when I started to do my own blogging on there, a newsletter, which is at andrewlsullivan.substack.com. And the reason I did that is a lot of the local stuff doesn't get covered very well. And when it does get covered, it's so heavily partisan, you're almost stuck in a fishbowl discussion instead of having a broader set of views.
Good, good. You know, one of the things that you raised, and I think we might have exchanged emails or talked about it, is there was an incident in the news about a lynching rope at a workplace dealing with African-American. There's a sense of symbolism related to that. And the person who put this lynching rope apparently got many years in prison, which I was surprised this white person got this much time, in light of in some places people can murder people and kill people, get less time than that. Talk to me a little bit about that, because you raised some issues that we're getting disproportionate in terms of how we put people in prison for things that may not be as egregious or negative as, let's say, cold-blooded murder or something like that. So talk to me a little bit about that, because it's a unique position.
This was something that was covered by the Nebraska Examiner and the Omaha World Herald. They didn't really go into great detail to what happened. Apparently, a white man at a workplace had placed a fake news on a workplace of a Black employee on there, and the Black person was traumatized by it. And apparently, before it didn't even go through local authorities on it. What ended up happening is the federal government came in and prosecuted the case on there. The man had already been fired from the job because of what he had done, and he ended up getting 4 months in jail. And the narrative is basically that, oh, this poor Black person needs protection, and this terrible white person must go to jail. When, geez, don't you think these two probably should have been brought into the office and talked to and says, hey, can you stop doing this crap on here? Stop doing this nonsense or handle it differently? Sure, maybe they need to be fined. Maybe it. But we're talking about rape, robbery, murder, and theft taking place, and you're putting someone in jail for 4 months on a federal level, not just a little city or state level, but on a federal level. So the proportionality causes problems, and I don't think people realize that. and the news media will push it and say, see, this is proper and all that stuff. But then you'll come across cases like your local businessman like David Mitchell. He just wants to make some case on it, and then he gets attacked with a bunch of goofball charges on there that later proved out to be false. So those type of narratives of how they portray black and white on there causes some conflict I think people need to discuss.
Right. Well, I know some may disagree with each other, but again, that's part of this conversation today. I want to switch up and go to you've been following this guy named Tom McDonald, I think, and he's a rapper who talks about the system. And I had a chance to listen to him. And basically what he's saying is that we're being brainwashed and the system's full of crap, and all the stuff that goes on is that we are refusing to understand. It's like we're taking the blue pill versus the red pill and so on. He's a rap artist, but why are you attracted to him, and what's so significant about this particular individual I've never heard of until you introduced him to me?
Well, interestingly enough, I hadn't heard about him till about a couple of months ago on there. Ironically, he's been becoming well known in the rap community on there, and it was a black woman that referred me to his music on there, and I was stunned. Because it shows that there's a culture out there that really wants to talk about freedom and important things on there, instead of this name calling and framing people and causing all this agitation and divide people on it. The interesting thing, if you put in Tom McDonald reactions in something like YouTube, you'll find that a lot of people of all the different types of races are responding to his videos on there because they really hit home for a lot of people.
You know, the other thing, when I listen to him, he basically talks about how dysfunctional government is and how systems are just messed up. And, you know, when you work in Douglas County or some of these local governments, you almost want to become an anarchist because you see so much dysfunctionality and buffoonery going on in these systems. I'm going to switch up a little. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's true. That's one of the things that I remember you telling me about that. And that's exactly what really turned people into anarchists, libertarians, mini-archists, Ayn Rand advocates, and so forth on it. In this case, what Tom McDonald, though, is hitting, you know, where he's getting to the truth of the stuff that the people don't, what the elite type of narratives are being pushed out there, and he goes to attack those. He's an interesting listener. The other song that I mentioned to you the first time was Names, and he explains, goes to that song explaining how name calling has gone so far out of hand in this country on here that people should just start ignoring the name calling, just stop with it.
Well, you know, another thing has been this whole trolley thing the mayor's promoting and pushing out again. And you got Warren Buffett comes out and try to give her a little advice, but I guess it's like talking to the wall. But here you got transportation problems in Nebraska, you got them in Omaha, you got problems with garbage pickup, and we're going to spend all these millions of dollars on a trolley car to nowhere. I mean, again, where did the community, the mandate say that we want to spend public money on something when we don't even have a basic infrastructure on traffic, good transportation between North and South Omaha? I mean, again, we've had a problem with transportation in Omaha for years. And so our mayor gets into this medical center agenda. And so she's going to have this downtown, you know, to nowhere. And again, the amount of money you're going to spend is excessive. But again, it's another example of government not listening to the people.
Yeah, in the case you're mentioning with the streetcar, that's going to come in with a series of problems. It's not just the mayor's office, it's the city council on there, and how Mutual of Omaha wants to relate to the community, and how UNMC wants to relate to the community, because they're the ones benefiting from that.
Yeah. I also noticed you gave a critique on, we had Dr. Amani, one of the previous chair of the Black Studies Department, and he's one of the social critics and also a person of credible, we call him a credible messenger, where he's not only in the academic community, but he's also dealing with grassroots folks. But you gave critique on his presentation, and you also gave a critique to us about the health discussion we had. We've invited, you know, we invite many whites on our programs, or we invite folks in general. And I noticed that some of the whites are very quiet and scared, like, or they won't say nothing even when there's very controversial issues. So help me understand, how do we deal with that, or how do we talk about that that issue of this quiet silence that apparently you're not inflicted with?
Well, part of it's Nebraska, because this state was formed after the Civil War, and a lot of people that came to this state want to put the conflicts from the East aside. And you'll find that true of a lot of things on there. It's not just race issues or economic issues. It can be over different hats, for crying out loud. But you mentioned Dr. Monty, though, what I was impressed with him is that he made a point of making very serious criticisms I thought were legitimate and true. And I guess he's got a really good strength from his sociology background on it, because he really hit on points about organizations. But with the mental health thing, we're kind of stuck with a little issue on there that people don't want to talk about. A lot of times Black people are portrayed being violent thugs on there and all this stuff on. And at the same time, if you go see some of these virtual videos that come out here that go viral on there, you find a Black person engaged in a situation where they lose their temper and they hit someone, and it becomes funny for a lot of people. But reality is the person probably just needs some anger management training. And if they would get that, you wouldn't have the assault problems on there and many of the issues that go around that. But unfortunately, we don't talk about that. So what happens is you find these decent people who so happen to be Black and have a criminal record simply because they lost temper with somebody somewhere along the way. Now, I know some people are very sensitive about that, but when you have something as public as Will Smith smacking Chris Rock on there, you kind of have to ask what's going on with Will Smith in the privates in his private world on there. And it's those type of things which cause people to ask, should he have would anger management help? Would this reduce problem on it? But we don't talk about that.
No, and one of the things that I noticed that when it went down, there was a certain amount of airplay in the media, and people talked about it on one level, but again, at the end of the day, it points to some great systemic issues. We're now to 2023. Again, it's a new year. We got new calendars. We've made our New Year's resolution and so on. What do you see on the horizons as a white male, ultra conservative dealing with race relations from your position that we should address if we want to avoid terrible conditions from your perspective? It's kind of a loaded question, throwing my token white conservative, semi-libertarian Republican friend.
Yeah, white male. Well, first of all, white people don't exist and males don't exist. But no, let me push the button on this. What's going to what you're seeing is taking place here. This is what makes the racial issues now kind of perpendicular and off kilter on there. There's several conflicts going on right now. You got the division between urban and rural. You got the division between white collar and blue collar. You got some of the division between Black and white, but you even got a division within the Democrat and Republican parties on there that people don't fully understand. So in 2023, you're going to see a lot of those come into conflict because none of them really have a cosmopolitan view. They are all bringing subculture ideas without any respect to the people in whole. And you're going to see, I think we'll see more conflict like that in the years ahead.
So you don't see anything jumping out at us that's going to make us like this January the 6th event that happened and some of the stuff that happened, some of these crazy things that happen. You can see more of that happening then from your vantage point?
You have people, let me give you an example. Well, I don't want to go too political, but let me put it in the square set as what's happened to some people on this. For 6 years, the Democrats have basically complained about the elections. First, it was Russian collusion ordeal. Then it was the January 6th stuff, and then it just keeps going on. And there comes a point and it says, okay, what about me? What about my family? What about my relatives? What about my community? And what about my city? And people have those questions and they're not getting answers that they want. So they're feeding a hole that they don't realize where it's going. I had to try to explain that to people that some of the communities are kind of lost right now because they don't see any real representation in government of where they want things are. But at the same time, they don't understand other people either because they've been taught to feel conflict instead of community.
Right. You know, it reminds me of I had a chance to talk to Sherry Dawson, who was the head of behavioral health for the state of Nebraska, and she interviewed me. We talked about 2 or 3 different times, and she was doing some kind of survey and so on. And after she finished, you know, this whole parade or this dance after that, I said to her, what are we going to do with this information that she had collected? And she says, well, do what you want to do with it. And I was kind of shocked with her cavalier, self-serving drivel that she actually said that to me, because she knows I don't keep secrets from the community related to state functionaries. But I was disappointed because, again, it was a waste of my time to even hold a conversation with her. And she's a nice person, but the fact that you got somebody who's a key position to say that to me, it shows me what they think of the people that they serve. The other issue they were trying to do was they were trying to do better outreach with behavioral health in the state of Nebraska, but you're not going to get that when you're all holed up in one of those government offices in Lincoln. And I think the same thing happened with city, county, and county government, where you got these workers who've never been into the community, they never really interact with real people, and they begin to create these virtual realities, and then people get very angry and cynical because they see these functionaries acting as robots in a sense. So it's one of those things, but I experience it all the time when I look at people who are not sensitive to the community people.
Well, I think maybe you would have a say on this part on it, but I think a lot of the social media stuff amplifies voices that are abusive, I should say, or over-grandizing issues, while other people get kind of silenced because they don't know the technology, or they're not using the technology, or they're basically excluded from the technology. Okay. I've had my take with Facebook on here because sometimes policy is being driven by Facebook junkies who block everyone they disagree with, right, and then they bully their position forward. And then you have to go back and explain to the elected officials, says, that's not what the public thinks. That's not what your community thinks. And that's what my neighbors think. So you have to find out where that is. And that puts a lot of effort and work on behalf of each of us as individuals to figure out just what do people think and just what is taking place.
You know, as you mentioned that, Andrew, I sometimes make comment on Facebook, and especially some of those self-serving pages, and I notice they go back and they take it off. So I say, why even comment? Even sometime in the World Herald, you'll see stuff where you comment, and if they disagree with you, if they use the term racism or some kind of what they consider a controversial word, they will kind of ban you from their, money-making venture. So we can't expect democracy in Facebook or these social media when you got people who with Twitter and all these other things who can actually just remove you because they dislike something you may have said.
Well, the worst part about social media is not just the censorship that's taking place from the tech firms on, but the fact that people block each other. Right. If you think you're tolerant, here's a challenge for you to take. Go to your Facebook, your Twitter, or whatever social media, and go look in the settings how many people you block. You may think you only blocked 2 or 3 people on. You might find they had 3 to 4 dozen people blocked, if not 100.
And you block it because you don't like something they said.
Yeah, that's what happens to people, and that ends up narrowing your viewpoint of the world.
Wow. Well, I guess there must be a lot of blocking in Nebraska because there's narrow viewpoints that I run into every day. By the way, switching up, Andrew, you are a prolific reader. I know that you. And my question is, what are some of the top books that you would suggest for our non-reading audience? I notice I use the word non-reading audience because people who read get in that, but that would increase their cranial capacity. Well,
I did. You sent me the question on that. I think we actually kind of were talking about that the first time around. And I found out for the more group on here, since there's many of you in the academic world on it and then many others that have been in experience, I'm going to recommend 3 books on here, and I hope we can see them here.
Okay.
I might have to push.
What is the name of it? Say the name of it.
It
Black Rednecks and White.
Black Rednecks and White Liberals by Thomas Sowell. And this book explains to you the difference from how Black people are largely blue-collar workers and white people tend to be white-collared academics, and that creates a conflict of all of its own. But he also goes into a lot of other issues in there. But I don't know if you can see it there.
I see it now, right.
I would recommend that to people on there. The second one, and this one I kind of like because the situation is a lot of people like to talk about Lincoln, and Republicans and Democrats and everyone in between likes to elevate him to a level he doesn't deserve. In fact, a book called Forced into Glory by Jeremy Bennett does a much more larger take on Lincoln and explaining what Lincoln did. But I recommend The Problem with Lincoln by Thomas DiLorenzo. And the reason I recommend this one's a fairly easy book to read on there. You can get pretty much anywhere. You probably can get used now for fairly cheap on it. But it will give you an outline of how Lincoln was largely incompetent with many things and caused a lot more problems on it. But as great as it is for uniting the Union on it, between slavery and the rest of the wars, the war on there, he kind of screwed things up. The person that really deserves responsibility for ending slavery actually goes to General Benjamin Butler, but that's another story for another day. The other book I recommend is Sick from Freedom by Jim Downs, and you're going to see it's a little black book, so it's not going to show up very well on the screen, but this book I recommend because most of us don't read anything about the Reconstruction. In fact, what we do read is very, very little. But this one explains to people how the U.S. federal government had the Freedmen's Bureau try to help former slaves, but still over 20% of those slaves died from sickness and starvation after the war. So those three I do think on the racial aspect. There's two I'm going to pick on here just for economics because most people are functionally illiterate about economics in many. One of them I recommend that's an easy read is How an Economy Grows by Peter D. Schiff. You can probably see this.
I see it now.
And I would recommend that one. But then if you want something a little bit more in depth on there that kind of goes to the supply side economics, which a lot of the people on the far left hate, is How the World Works by Jude Wanniski. This one's a famous book on there, and it's worth reading on there so you have a better understanding where the economics has played over the last few decades.
Well, I appreciate that. I know we did a book reading group and we had Malcolm X, we had 20 people who signed up initially. And at the end of the series we had, it was a 10-week series, it was pretty long for most folks. We only had like 4 or 5, I say about 5 or 6 white folks. There was no African Americans. And so I deduced that some of us don't know how to read because we went through the public school system. But again, some people can't commit that kind of time. But I encourage people to read books, and it increases your intellectual capacity to engage and debate issues and also discern some of the foolishness that they're trying to be ramrod down our throats in this local community, especially in the state. We only got about 10 minutes left, and I want to ask you, now this is controversial. We've been seeing a lot of information about homosexuality, lesbians, LGBTQ. So we heard Dave Chappelle came out with The Closer, and it's just been a lot of movement. And I want to get your viewpoint because I know you were going to come at it straight. But in our previous conversation, you talked about homosexuals and lesbians and others in that LGBT field. Can you summarize their catching hell? Are they catching hell? Contrast to African Americans in the society, and do we have the ability to detect conversations? Do we have the ability to have decent conversations on sexual identity and sexual focus proclivities of people who are into promoting their agendas in that area? And I say that hopefully in a respectful way.
That's you started me with a discussion on that on an article I had written about what had happened at Millard, where apparently a student had put up a gay pride flag. And what kind of irritated me about this is a lot of people don't understand what a flag is for and what purpose of a flag is. It's supposed to unite people. And though the gay community was saying that the flag represents diversity, a lot of people just say that that's a sign of a gay bar or a gay establishment. So when you're trying to have children and teenagers try to identify with that as far as inclusion on, I said I had to try to explain to them, in many ways, it's exclusionary. And that's one of the problems that comes up on here when we start talking about the gay and lesbian community. The interesting thing, over hundreds of years and thousands of years, the way we define sexuality, the way we define our morals behind it, tends to shift in and out because it's so intensely private on there, yet it can have such public consequences. A lot of what has happened for the gay community now is largely the result of what happened decades ago after the AIDS crisis. You have them took the gay and lesbian movement and made it much more conservative. In fact, that's what one of the ironies right now is. You have someone like David Rubin, an openly gay man, flat out being conservative on there and defending conservative ideas on there as a Republican. And so, that change is going to cause consternation in some of the communities on there, particularly if you would have people that are engaged in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party or in between, because now you have another set of constituents who have a different viewpoint and a different and are actually engaged in life again.
So Andrew, you lost me a little bit at the beginning when you said if somebody raised a gay flag or the LGBT flag somewhat, they're being exclusionary or they're being individualistic where they're not bringing other people in the circle. I thought flags are supposed to unite people the way you said it.
Right.
I don't see it as a negative the way you put it.
But that's not the way that we put the flag is the rainbow flag is perceived. In fact, that's one of the things that caused consternation with it. It's like, okay, for a gay pride parade, that's fine. For a gay bar, it's fine. For commercial purposes, such as what travel industries had done with it, that may be fine as well on it. But in other ways, it's also seen as being completely exclusionary, as in you're pushing agenda on me or you or anyone else on there. If you want a comparison like that, I would bring up, there's numerous flags that I was pointing out. One of them is the Confederate flag that a lot of people in the Black community would take heavy offense of. But then there's a lot of Black people in the South that will tell you, hey, you invaded the South on here and we were defending ourselves on it. And so they'll defend the Confederate flag in that matter. But it's hard to have people have unified view of that. If you bring that up on there, you're inviting an argument, but not bringing people together. And that's what happens with the rainbow flag in some of these communities. It might work in downtown Omaha, but I don't think it would work in Saunders County.
Well, as a person who don't do flags in general, that's just my constitutional rights. I share with folks that the only flag I know is the black flag, the roach insect, but I don't get into that patriotism stuff because, again, the flag never fed me or did anything. And again, we disagree with that. And as you all know, people can burn their own personal flags. That's what it's all about. But again, part of what you're saying is you see the flag, this flag is negative because it divides people, which I find somewhat different, or I'm a little different. But I think other people may respond to that too.
Let me be clear about it. There's an aspect of where a flag can be used and unify people on. But when you put it in a school setting on it, there's the two flags that only public school can fly. I mean, it's part of government for.
Okay, that's what you're saying. In other words, you do it privately, but not at the schools.
It's just like the U.S. Postal Office. You have the U.S. flag and the Nebraska flag.
And nothing else.
And nothing else. That's pretty much it. And that's what I was trying to get at with that.
Yeah, and I think that's where some of the conversation is going to happen in this community or even in this show. So we're getting down to, I know we're getting ready to switch over, but before we switch over, do you have any other comments or anything you want to share with the listening audience? I know you raised a number of contentious issues, and I want to give you fair play if you want to share something else before we move over to people who may have different points of views.
The gentleman behind me, just so you know who those are out there, those are Buffalo soldiers. They served in the U.S. Army as Black men on there from about after the Civil War to all the way up to the time that integration started taking place under Eisenhower. In case you didn't know this, there were thousands of Black Buffalo soldiers stationed at Fort Robinson here in Nebraska on it, and they were there for 18 years. A lot of people don't know about that history.
Well, it's not taught by the Omaha Public Schools, obviously, and it's not taught by the Nebraska Historical Society, and these folks, they don't cover a lot of that. Folks, we're right up on that time, and I want to give people a chance if they want to throw out a question, a comment, or even talk directly to Andrew. This is the time we can do it. So we have about 30 minutes to do this. And again, one of the things we invited him here is to be able to share his point of view, but also to be able to react or talk to other people who may have a contrary or different points of view. So let's open up the mic and see if we got some brave souls, as we would say.
Oh, I see what they did here.
Kind of hits me where the co-concept of bystanders come in. Like I said, one of the editorials I'm going to write is about having doing these shows so many times, how folks are just very quiet when obviously, they have points of view when you push those buttons or poke the bears, they say.
Yeah, I think some people are probably thinking about it, and they're not certain what question to put forward on it. The avenue that we take, though, on some of the discussions with the public schools on there, anytime we try to get these new social movements pushing through the schools on it, there's going to be controversy. I think what caused consternation with the transgender community and the gay and lesbian community is somehow we decided that sex education had to be a year-round program, when it may have been better if we had just had a 3-day seminar with parents attending, so the idea that they be communicated. But we kind of broke the public-private aspect about sexuality by making sex education a full-time part of the curriculum. And I think we just invited a bunch of some of this trouble on it, where it's going to divide people further on. What the end result is going to be, I really don't know.
I just wish we had a better sense of communication on it. I've shared that I was actually going to set up something a number of years ago at First United Methodist Church with the African American community, the gay, lesbian, transgender, LGBTQ plus, so on. And I had opposition on both sides who didn't want to deal with it, because I think, there's this issue dealing with racism and sexual orientation that needs to be talked about in the conservative community like Omaha, Nebraska, and in general. And I couldn't get traction. Again, the person I contact who worked at UNO, he didn't get back to me. And then there was another community gadfly person said he would come and disrupt the event if I held it. And so, and I ended up not even holding it. But it's like, you got this vacuum in this community, and you got all these different fractions and groups who can't come together to deal with the Trumpites and so on. Someone has a comment. I think Dory Bush had something. Did you want to say something, Dory? Or we'll start going as you finish. You want to say something to Dory?
Well, what I was going to say, was someone else asking a question there?
Yeah, there is a question or comment in here. Dory, do you want to say something directly to him or open up your mic? There you go. Oh, who?
Here I am.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Ask Andrew directly.
I actually just put that in the chat, and I'm going to read what I wrote because that says it succinctly, I think. It says, so many of our struggles to communicate are based on our individual perceptions, which are individual and are based on the individual's personal experiences. The books that Mr. Sullivan described are an argument for a broader view of American history, particularly the history related to the Civil War, should be Civil War, and Reconstruction. We need to know all of our history. I didn't want to use that horrible term CRT, because that just, number one, nobody has any idea what it means. But I think, my feeling just in general is that until we are able to just communicate honestly, but what we share comes from us individually, and the experiences that we've had. And it's frustrating to me that people can't talk a little bit more reasonably to each other. But we all have different perceptions, I guess, is the bottom line.
Well, I got you, Dory. Is there a group in Lincoln that does some of these conversations like this? Is there anybody like that in Lincoln where you're at that has conversations like this, or no?
There really isn't at this point, but I think I shared with you, Ajmal, that we have an upcoming OLLI class in Lincoln that's going to be about how to start conversations about race. And I'm really looking forward to it. The woman that's going to be our teacher is Sandra Washington, who happens to be a Black woman. She's a city council woman, a good friend of mine. And I'm really, really, really looking forward to the conversations that will begin, because until we talk, nothing changes.
By the way, Dory, I'm gonna give a shout out. You and I met over 10 years ago in Grand Island when you were with the YWCA. We did a number of table talks there. It was just fascinating to deal with some of the conversations in that community, dealing with the Hispanics. You also had Sudanese there. And I remember one day, and I don't know if you recall that, we were having supper, and the one Sudanese guy looked me dead in the eye, and he was talking to the whole group, and he says, there are people who look at him as they look through him. In other words, he said they make him feel very unwelcome. And it was such a biting look that he gave me, like, you know what I'm talking about. And I felt so sad. Here this guy comes from so far as a refugee to Nebraska, and we're supposed to show some Nebraska niceness. And the guy came and threw out some heavy light at that dinner and just basically shared with us the nuance and the nepotism and the kind of negativity of racism in Grand Island. Again, I know there were some leaders in the community with the Y and elsewhere, and yourself, trying to improve that, but I don't know what came of it after we left our table talk events.
Oh, and my daughter-in-law happens to be Peruvian from South America, so we have that extra culture in our family. And it never occurred to me that my son and his wife would be treated any differently because they're an intercultural. Never occurred to me, because I don't see them that way. And then I thought, well, I'm really naive, obviously. But I continue to feel like it's such a shame that we are so visual in our assumptions about folks.
Somebody had on the Grand Island, New York, no, Grand Island, Nebraska.
That's
That's kind of like when I went to St. Paul, Nebraska. I say, St. Paul, Minnesota? No, we Nebraska, Jack. We Nebraska centric or whatever. So that was funny. I like that. Yeah, I don't even know where Grand Island, New York is at. I know where New York is in the city, but that's good. I think that. Other feedback, other reactions.
Jamal, I would like to ask your guest a question,
Oh,
please.
sure. Oh, wait, hold on. Dory, did you finish?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Donna, can you go forward? Then Donna, you got the floor.
Well, a couple of things. I was very interested in what I thought were his comments about Abraham Lincoln, but then when he pointed to the picture of the Buffalo Soldiers, I really felt I just needed to ask Mr. Sullivan, what are your thoughts about the President of the United States signing a declaration that 38 Dakota people could be hung on December 26, 1862?
That was a highly controversial issue on there. And you want to know what's interesting about it? That fight was so severe on it. Thousands of Indians Native Americans had been captured on it. They actually didn't want that to be a slaughter, and they reduced the amount to 38. And even today, when people hear about that, it is one of the disgusting parts about what Lincoln was doing on it. There's a part here's something that people really don't. Every now and then, again, there's a discussion with people, and they talk about white supremacy and white colonialism, all this stuff. They never really pay attention to the fact that there's over 20 different languages in Europe, and you had numerous types of countries engaged in colonial activities, and not all of them did the same thing. I mean, the United States, I mean, Florida used to be part of Spain. Mexico, Texas used to be part of Mexico. Louisiana used to be part of France. And the land we're on was actually part of the Louisiana Purchase. And all those things come into play. And even Russia was in California, which is why the California flag has the Russian bear on it. So we bring into all those conflicts on there. And the Native Americans are stuck in the situation where Lincoln is taking Henry Clay's America's plan and literally trying to forge a railroad. We don't talk much about that. Everyone just says the railroad's a great thing. But that Indian conflict in Minnesota, that was part of trying to plow the country westward.
I understand all of that, but what I'm saying is I was just interested in your perspective of the President of the United States ordering the largest execution of human beings in the history of this country. I mean, there's the people were starved to death, the army wouldn't feed them, blah, blah, blah. But I was just interested in your perception of his action doing that. Then within days, he signs the proclamation. Well, the Emancipation Proclamation. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, one of the things that there's several parts that Lincoln's doing this. I mean, the executions are horrible, and I think that if you did that by modern human rights standards on that, it wouldn't be disgusted and find it awful. But Lincoln did a lot of those strange things on it. I mean, the Emancipation Proclamation. This might surprise people, but the Union generals got upset with it because they were told that they could free slaves where they didn't have any ability to do so, but they weren't freeing slaves where they did have the ability to do so. In fact, that's one of the arguments that John C. Fremont, who was the first Republican nominee for president, when he was a general on there, he wanted to free slaves on. Well, Lincoln turned right around and countermanded that order. So you can find a whole bunch of stuff that Lincoln did on it. It's just not just that those executions of those 38 Native Americans. There's a whole bunch of stuff that is confusing out there.
Don, I want to ask you a question because I only discovered that recently, and I actually took a class in Native American when I was an undergraduate. How did you learn about that incident? Because like I said, I discovered it on Facebook within the last few years, and I didn't know that even took place. So how did you learn about it? Or is that commonly taught in our courses, in our academic or our educational systems, this egregious act that the President Lincoln did to the Native
No,
Americans?
no. And I worked at the Lincoln Indian Center for a number of years, and I didn't know anything about it until I came to Omaha. And in 2000, actually, and some of my Dakota friends informed me of it, and I saw the YouTube video of it, and I was very alarmed, and it changed the way that I think about Abraham Lincoln, period. I don't care what he did and how he did it, but the idea that he could do something like that. Imagine, I mean, some of us are outraged when there is one execution.
Right.
And just imagine that some white person wanted 300 Native soldiers killed, and he said no, 38. And so I'm just outraged that I mean, yes, it should be taught in school, but we don't teach a lot of things in school, because think of who the teachers are and the writers of our history. So
Right.
I don't even have that expectation. It's just that I was listening to him talk about to talk about Lincoln, and then to bring up the Buffalo Soldiers, and I thought, oh, I can't let this go without acknowledging the loss of Lakota people, because who did if they were stationed at Fort Robinson, yes, okay, but who were they there to fight?
Right.
Well, here's a couple avenues that people should realize that one of the things that I tried to explain to, I get frustrated when we talk about Reconstruction, because people get the focus of the Ku Klux Klan on that, not realizing that the lynching that was taking place was taken by numerous entities out there, and that many of the lynchings were white people on it. At the same time, once the Ku Klux Klan was scooped out of the way, you had racist groups that were just flat out killing people on it. And 19th century America is very violent throughout. I mean, that's how Alexander Hamilton got killed by Aaron Burr. But even here in Nebraska, we have mention of the lynchings that took place here in Douglas County. What most people don't know is there were over 57 lynchings that took place in Nebraska, and the vast majority of them were white people. And you try to tell people that, and they're like, where are you getting that information? Well, Nebraska Historical Society has that documentation. James Potter wrote the history on that, and I actually had the article on it. But that's one of the things people don't hear about, is just how violent the 19th century was.
Down and Sullivan, somebody asked, what is the name of that incident where what do they call where Lincoln executed those 38 Native Americans? What is that called? The name of it.
You can see it on YouTube, and it's called the Dakota 38.
Okay, so that's how you find
And
about
it's
it.
about, yeah,
Dakota Massacre, I think it
and
was.
they just each year, and this is the last year that they're doing it, they would ride from Crow Creek all the way, leaving on the 10th of December to arrive in Mankato, Minnesota on the 25th, Christmas Day, because the hanging took place the day after Christmas. So
Wow.
not only was it cruel, it was unusual in that they would do it on that particular day. And people imagine this, and if you take the time to look at the video, it's extraordinary to see the natives and how they were welcomed by white people along the way to Mankato, and they're going on horseback. Now think about that.
Wow.
They're going on horseback all the way. And so I would urge people to just take a minute, and if there are children in the house, to let the children watch it, because it is very educational.
Wow.
There are other avenues that people don't even realize just how depth American history is. I'll give you one thing that contributed to some of the Native Americans' demise and some of this stuff is, we think of Native America. If you look in South Dakota, they are building a monument to Crazy Horse on there, and it's being built on it. And he was killed out near Fort Robinson. There's a monument to him there. But I get stuck on one thing about that. The horse is a European animal, was brought by the Europeans over. And we don't think about how that changed Native American culture and brought them in conflict with people. And a lot of that changed it. And then if you go back even further on, back to like William Penn, when he helped to create the Pennsylvania colonies, and Pennsylvania Commonwealth, they were at peace with the Native Americans. But what will stun you is that as soon as that colony became part of the United States, that peace disappeared. And then that's when the United States continued to expand westward. There's other things that people don't know about the early colonial periods of America, because it was a really big experiment on what self-governance was about. Alan Dershowitz did a really interesting video a few days ago on the Massachusetts Bay Colony. This will stun you. They banned Christmas trees and Christmas. They were that Puritan in their beliefs on there. And they actually were very anti-Catholic, and they gave warnings out to Jesuits about Jesuits being in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. That part of history you don't hear about. And it's part of that attitude that as the United States progressed westward, a lot of the violent and bigoted attitudes carried with it and took different formations of it. And it's not until the expansion of freedom, the expansion of tolerance, the pushback to expand freedom for everyone, that came to an end. But a lot of people don't realize just how violent that 19th century was.
Paul, you got a question? There's a question on here.
I think Azalia has a question. Let's see down here in the list.
Yeah. I see a hand up. There's another hand up here. Marcy, yeah, it's another hand up. Open it up. Open your mic up and talk directly.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
You talked about there were a ton of white people who were also being lynched during this time. What were they being lynched about?
Oh, it could be a lot of times it was cattle rustling, and other crimes on it that they'd be accused of it, and sometimes they were really just kangaroo courts of a mob, basically, that would take place on it, but it would vary. And one of them, I can't remember the county, when one took place on it, a woman was executed because of her land dealings with the local people on there. And they got mad and was convinced that she had burned down someone's home and barn on there. So they ended up hanging her. I think it was her and her brother were both put on horse under a bridge on there, and the ropes were put on the bridge on there, and the horses were, of course, let go, and that they were lynched on that bridge. And you can find that on YouTube on there. The Nebraska's only lynched woman. But that took place in the 19th century, and people don't know about these stuff.
Andrew, why do people don't know about this stuff? Why?
I think it's because we've been given a formulated textbook and just told, okay, you've studied history, you don't need to study anymore, not realizing that you're only getting a snippet of how deep history is. I try to encourage people, if you take an interest in history, just realize you can get numerous viewpoints on there, and you can get a lot more texture and development, an understanding of countries, people, and cultures by studying the history. Every human being is merely one thread in the human tapestry, and that tapestry is huge.
Right, gotcha. Madam, I see you got your hand up. The mic is yours.
It sounds like you're saying that there were white people who were being lynched because they committed crimes or were reasonably expected to have committed crimes. Whereas for Black people, of course, they were being lynched really under false pretenses in a lot of cases. So I think that is an important distinction to make, if I'm in fact correct. It's also interesting that you keep saying people don't know this, people don't know this. And I'm looking at a link here posted in the chat
Mhm.
about the hanging incident in Minnesota, and it's saying an uneasy topic for Minnesota schools. How does this fit into your views of CRT? The average American has probably never heard of this incident. We don't learn about it in schools. I guess everyone needs to read more to really get the breadth of things that happened in the past that we don't learn about in schools. And CRT is banned in a lot of states now. So be it. So I'm just wondering, when is it appropriate for people to actually learn things when we all know what we had been learning is really only a small fraction of history? And so we go through our whole, even some of us go through college and never know this stuff.
The issue, there's a couple of issues you got folded in there. One, a lot of times when a white person lynched another white person, it was based on faulty information. In fact, Gage County, they hanged a man for the murder of his former friend, and then 3 years later, the former friend comes back to Gage County and wants to know what happened to him, and he finds out that the guy's been lynched. So those type of stories are out there. It's a matter of doing the research and looking for them. Now, when you're talking about critical race theory or this particular Lakota thing, I think a lot of people misunderstood what the issue was with CRT. There's a take out there on history that wants to convince you that white people are so deadly, so dangerous, that if your child thinks there's a monster under the bed, it's probably a white supremacist. And that if you're going to prevent getting eaten by that white supremacist under your bed, well, you better put some chicken beer out for it, so it'll eat that instead of eating you. That's how far pushing it. And that's not just a matter of colleges and stuff doing this. This got transferred into many of the corporations that are hiring people, and they say, well, we want to be fair and be racially sensitive. But then they take on this tone on there where they literally want to blame one particular race for everyone and then dissolve another race of absolutely everything. And when it happens, you just feed more conflict. You don't bring resolution. You don't unify people.
Yeah, well, that's your perception of CRT. And a lot of us think that the narrative was hijacked and that that's not really what CRT is. So
well, let me help you on this. The CRT is probably just a more the latest label given to a series of studies that have come out, partly from Black studies, partly from Marxist studies, partly from some of the old far left aspects on there. And so you might get, depending on where you are in the country, you might get a different flavor of it. Some of the latest parts of it was just flat out anti-Trump, not realizing that a bunch of blue-collar people were supporting Trump, and particularly Bernie Sanders supporters. But there's other versions of that CRT that shows up that when you have interracial families now, keep in mind, Nebraska and many states didn't allow for interracial marriages just 100 years ago, just 50 years ago in some cases. Now you have families with interracial families on there, and they're reading this stuff in their school books or in their corporation or in their business, and they're getting ticked off about it because it's not accurate. And the reason is a lot of our history books just give brief stereotypes or brief labelings of things on there, and people really don't get the depth of what they need to understand other people.
I want to interrupt if I can. There's a question I didn't get to. Andrew, you made a comment about anger in Black folks. The question is, why does he think Black people have the anger problem versus white people? That's always a moniker about Black people in general, but when a white person does the same thing, it's individualized. So talk to me a little bit about that, a response to that question or comment.
Here's the difference on that. And I appreciate that because I understand that perspective very well. When white people if Will Smith and Chris Rock had been both white, and Will Smith would have been castigated, would have been really brought under, says, well, what's the matter with you? Do you have mental illness? Have you taken an anger management course? There would be an outpouring of outrage. Why did you do this in public? And if you're doing this in public, what are you doing private? Are you slapping your wife and your kids and stuff like that? he would be excoriated. But because it's a black on black situation on there, somehow it's just okay and we just ignore it. And if you doubt this, you'll see that will come on through these social media every now and then. They'll show a black person. One of them is one of these. I'll give you an example. One of them that came up on it recently was a black woman attendant at an airport gets mad because her computer's broken. So she just starts smashing the entire countertop, all the computers on it, ripping them out, tearing them out, shredding everything on it. And she gets arrested. And everyone thinks this is funny. It gets spread out on social media. Not understanding she has anger issues. And then there's another example that came across on here. And two black boys are watching a game, basketball or something, and their team loses. Well, the older boy, the older brother, gets mad and he starts kicking the television, beating it, smashing it, and his little brother's trying to stop him, trying to save the television set. Well, a lot of people just view that as funny. But no, that should tell you there needs to be some type of intervention on there to say, look, you just ruined a $200 plus television set. Where are you going to get a new one? That's where there needs to be a discussion about that. Now, that's not to suggest that the vast majority of black people or even the minority of black people have. It's just that there's just enough of those incidences out there that end up on social media, going viral, and people laugh at it and think it's funny and all that stuff on there, not realizing that person has a personal problem that needs to be addressed.
We're down to our last minute. I want to give you a chance for some closing comments also for the listening or viewing audience to fill out an evaluation form. We do evaluations on these events to get more information. So, Andrew, do you have any closing comments as we wind down to the end of the show?
I just want to thank you, Jamal, for giving me the opportunity to speak to your audience again on this. And I'm glad for all the attendees participating and in your input on it. I appreciate that. I hope you'll make a point of sharing this video with your friends on there and liking it on Facebook and liking it on YouTube. That helps promote the Moore's agenda and items on discussion.
Good, well, appreciate that. Folks, we are going to be bringing some different and new shows for 2023. They're going to focus a lot more on the Southern African Project. We'll talk more about that as we get into it, where we're trying to do some table talk type events with people in Southern Africa about their apartheid and this colonization and situations in that part of the world, as well as what is happening here in the deep South, particularly the United States, as Malcolm says, north of Canada, the enslavement of African folks. And again, how many of those things parallel each other and some of them they're different. So we'll talk more about that as we get more into our events. We also have some other events where we're going to look at public policy issues. We want to increase the number of people impacting the legislative agenda, as well as getting more involved with their state senators. We got a group of Congress people we need to contact. Obviously, you got county commissioners who kind of hibernate in their world. City council people who's obviously out of whack or out of sorts with some of the community needs and so on. So we're going to hopefully bring more of these information sessions and conversations of people in the know. So on that note, I would like to say thank you again for tuning in today. As we always end, may the force be with you, and Baroko.